cash transfer programming has gained significant traction in the humanitarian sector, as was illustrated not later than last year at the World Humanitarian Summit under the Grand Bargain commitments. Cash is indeed increasingly both substituting and complementing more traditional forms of aid. Thanks to modern technology, it is possible to put cash into the hands of beneficiaries. Cash has really a number of very serious advantages, as all of you who are dealing with cash transfer programming know. It does a great deal in terms of giving people affected by conflict and disasters the choice in terms of what their priority needs are, and this may not only be food, it is increasingly also education. It is significantly reducing opportunity costs, logistics costs, so in terms of efficiency, cash has great advantages. And last but not least, cash transfer programming, if combined with the use of modern technology, offers the opportunity of two-way communication with beneficiaries, and is therefore also offering great opportunities in terms of accountability to affected populations. Now, in the ICRC, cash transfer programs are not entirely new. It's not just something that we've done in the past 2-3 years. We started experimenting with cash for work in Afghanistan and microeconomic initiatives at the end of the 90s already. But again, it's only probably in the past few years, thanks to enhanced organizational capacity and the use of modern technology, that we have managed to scale cash transfer programming significantly. And in 2017, we are expecting to reach up to 2 million beneficiaries in nearly 40 different countries with cash transfer programming, and we have strong ambitions to double the number of beneficiaries by 2020 with cash transfer programming. What is also remarkable is the fact that cash transfer programming has been a key area of collaboration within the movement, and that is why, as Charlotte said, this is not just an ICRC event, this is really an event that we are running here on behalf for the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, and we are extremely pleased, of course, to have some donor representatives here, and also UN agencies and NGOs to learn from each other. So this is really a movement effort and a key area of collaboration and cooperation within the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement that has joined forces to improve their performance in cash transfer programming through the development of standard operating procedures, design of market analysis guidance and tools, cash in emergencies toolkit, and related training modules. Now, as we will probably also see during the day, cash transfer programming is obviously not the panacea for all the challenges we are facing in terms of living up to a role that we often have as the provider of the ultimate safety net in situations of armed conflicts and natural disasters. We will continue to face challenges that we all know in an increasingly fragmented conflict environment, but we all are absolutely convinced and adamant that cash transfer programming is going to play an increasingly important role for all of us to face some of these challenges. Now, the aim of today is very much to take stock of what we have achieved collectively as a movement, Red Cross Red Crescent movement in the field of cash transfer programming, together with all the participants here, including UN, NGOs and donors, identify very honestly and openly and transparently what are the challenges that we are facing in the field of cash transfer programming, and then, of course, learn the necessary lessons with and from each other to move forward in that particular space. The vision is clear for the Red Cross Red Crescent movement, is to be one of the leaders in the field of cash transfer programming with a view to making best possible use of cash for the very people who are affected by armed conflict and violence as well as natural disasters.
So what I can do is to maybe label the 6 unique selling points of the Red Cross Red Crescent movement when it comes to cash transfer programming. And those are that, of course, we have a global and local presence with 190 national societies, about 15 million volunteers worldwide. We also cover all situations when we put our efforts together with the Federation, the ICRC and national societies. We cover armed conflicts, we cover large, small-scale disasters, any kind of situations. That's the second selling point. But the third one is also that with the long-term presence, we can cover everything around the cycles of crisis, but also the resilience, the preparedness, the recovery aspects where cash can play a big role. We tend to focus on emergencies, but actually cash also has a role in the preparedness and the pre and the after phases, so the before, during, and after. A fourth aspect is that national societies have an auxiliary role to governments, so we can actually embed the Red Cross role in nationally led responses, including with links to social protection. And this is something that is coming now increasingly on the agenda in terms of the longer term support that governments have to provide to their populations. Then the fifth one would be that we can potentially, there we have to be a bit more modest, ensure that funds flow as directly as possible to local actors and disaster-affected people as part of our commitment to localization. And you might know that the International Federation is leading on the localization agenda linked to the Grand Bargain. This is, of course, very much linked to the support that we need to give to national societies as responders and first responders. And then the last one is that we as a movement, we are not limited by mandate or mission to particular sectors or types of emergencies, and therefore the notion of unconditional cash for us is probably much easier than for other organizations, and this is really something that we need to build upon and work on.
The question was to see if cash transfer programming is really realistic, feasible in armed conflict setting where ICRC has field operations. We'll just give you a few results of what we have achieved up to date. Cash is not new within ICRC. It has been delivered for some years back, starting by the crisis in the Balkans and then using microeconomic initiatives to give beneficiaries the capacity to sustain their livelihood. And then slowly we start moving to cash for work activities in Afghanistan, in Somalia, to support also the communities rehabilitating their infrastructures. And also we start integrating cash in our relief response with unconditional cash, where we saw technology can allow ICRC to be also responding in so many contexts, and also to see how we integrate the response also for the livelihood to support conflict-affected population livelihood. We have been experiencing a lot of good case studies in countries that we may not go in detail in this panel because it's just to give you an overview. And today I think we are in the positions to use all different kind of cash transfer programming to address varieties of need across our field operations. Now, how we reach this kind of raising of our response is also thanks to good guidance, SOPs, standard operating procedures, aligning logistics and finance in contracting with the financial service providers, because we can just work on the programming aspect, but on the procurement and other components, we really rely on our colleagues from the logistics to allow us contracting with the financial service providers. That's why we had a very steady ICRC SOPs for cash transfer programming that we review continuously as the cash also fight is evolving across the humanitarian sector. Also, we had to work on training our staff, building their capacities across different delegations. We started our training in 2014, but before that, 2012, we decided to really integrate cash as much as possible across ECOSEC response in different delegations. And then we said, okay, let's build the capacities of the ICRC staff, also together with the national societies, because we worked jointly in so many field operations, also to build their capacity to strengthen, which is in complementary action with what the movement does in terms of cash transfer programming preparedness. And also, we have very good movement coordination. I'm not going back to this one. It has been very well introduced before. And all of these factors has allowed the ICRC to develop cash transfer programming as response modality for the time being. Now, what is our approach today? I think cash is not a program as such within ICRC. It's just a tool we use across different programs. And we have our core component, and we see how we use cash. And the very positive things is cash can be used across different programs that we have within ECOSEC unit. We have 5 core components: food consumption, food production, income support, capacity building, living conditions to improve living conditions of our beneficiaries. And cash is a tool that we use across all these components, and it allows ICRC to have also a very well-established response. And the combination of cash and in-kind as well, this depends on the context. That's why our response are really context-based, need-based, and then we try to make very good understanding of the feasibility of cash, to not bring cash where it's not relevant, and to see where we can combine cash and other response modalities depending on the context. That's why you will see across the countries where we work, some countries may be in-kind focused response, and the others the combination of in-kind and cash, or mainly cash response, like in the Middle East for the varieties of countries where ICRC works today. And we try to promote unconditional cash to address essential needs, also cash to support the livelihood of our beneficiaries, and to use the local mechanisms for the transfer, which is ranging from direct cash. We use also new technology, bank system, we use mobile phone, etc. We try to ensure accountability to beneficiaries by communicating well on our programs, just to raise understanding. We have tools that we use from the Cash in Emergency Toolkit, as well to make sure that cash hands in the right hand of beneficiaries in the field. We are operating in so many countries. This is more or less our global map where we have been across Africa, in Americas, in the Middle East, as well as in Asia, to around 37 countries, 40 countries where we have cash response, ICRC cash response, in coordination with the cash working group at the country levels. We have been increasingly use cash in terms of budget, in terms of beneficiary coverage. If we go from 2000 to 16 cumulatively, we have distributed around 133 million Swiss francs directly to beneficiaries, covering around 3 million beneficiaries all these years cumulatively across different programs.
I will present some of the uses of cash and cash responses at the different levels, like scale-up responses. And then we also operate in small and medium-scale responses, which probably many of you didn't even think they existed, or they did not show in the media because they are small scale and they are picked up by our national societies. We have 190. So if we start With the Philippines Red Cross, I will give you an example where we use cash at scale as a movement. In the initial phase, we supported with what used to be called unconditional cash. Then it became unconditional and unrestricted, and now we are calling it multi-purpose cash grants. So we provided multi-purpose cash grants that are cash for basic needs as part of the response to 90,000 families in the emergency phase. We complemented that with cash for work initiatives, and we reached over 100,000 combining both of them. Our exit strategy for the multi-purpose cash grants is normally linked to livelihoods opportunities, because if we link that need and that vulnerability to the recovery of their livelihoods and to promote and strengthen their production capacity, we can also do that transition smoothly. Also, we do cash linked to shelter, where if we give people cash only, it's good. But if we don't support them with technical support to rebuild their houses, or we don't provide them with advocacy and some information on how to build more resilient, or what elements they can incorporate into their small houses, which can be very sophisticated or less sophisticated depending on the environment, in the end we are not promoting the resilience of that community. So for us, the cash is also linked to some other activities that will contribute that people are more prepared for the next time and also more resilient. We have Nepal, I think, is another one of the big ones. We supported with emergency response. By July, we distributed to 41,000 families. And then in December, looking at the situation that things did not change that much, or as much as we would like to, looking at the added vulnerability with the winter, with the borders closure with India, and also with some challenges that linked to the fuel supply in country and the prices going up because the transport costs increase. We provided another round of cash transfers. We use cash in envelope, which is something that we want to avoid, but in this case was a way to scaling up and providing the assistance in a timely manner. We are trying to work on our systems that we can be more effective using more technology and maybe mobile money and banking systems whenever possible, but in some responses we just go for the easy and quick, which is a compromise. And then we support also with the seeds, the cash for seeds, and some of the additional linkages with insurance or programs from the government to increase that production capacity. We have 68 countries when we respond to emergency appeals, that is our own funding mechanism, and then 37 countries that we use this grant mechanism that is also internal to the ICRC to support small and medium scale. And in these countries we use cash, or we plan to use cash. We have some examples. In Ukraine, we support the health with vouchers. And then this is done with vouchers because if we give cash to people, there is a black market of fake medicine. So if we are supporting these highly vulnerable, chronically ill people, we want to make sure that they are getting the right medication. We also support with vouchers for food and vouchers for non-food items. In Mongolia, for example, it was a very interesting response, how to support a very mobile, nomadic population with cash in an environment that they don't stay in the same place for a long time, and how to ensure that we do the post-monitoring and the distribution. So we link up with the National Society, link up with bank that got more branches in the country, and we provided that support. This Mongolia also gave us an opportunity to explore what can we do before the attack, before the disaster comes, to prevent that impact is so big. No, there is any funding mechanism that could help us to do early action to prevent. And then we have another case in Liberia, or in link to the Ebola response. We think Ebola, we think health, but it got a big impact in the economy, in the local economy, and also for the people that lost or were sick of Ebola, and also for our volunteers, we supported them through cash to help with the access to asset replacement, and also for our volunteers to help them after the Ebola response finished to reintegrate also back to the normal work and to deal with that stigma that they face. In Turkey, we have our national society, the Turkish Red Crescent, linked in partnership with WFP and with the Turkish government, thanks to the support with the European Union, that they are engaging in a 1 million support to the refugees and the migrants. And this is linked to a social safety net for those populations that are not Turkish of nationality. In American Red Cross, we have a domestic response with, for example, Katrina, where more than 1 million cash grants were distributed. And then in Kenya Red Cross, I think is one of the strongest national societies we have on cash. And then I wanted to highlight that to do cash at scale in an effective, adequate, appropriate manner, we need to invest in preparedness.
In general, the Cash Peer Working Group, the terms of reference is to provide a coordinating, a central point for discussion for the movement. It's a group of peers. We are cash focal points within each of our national societies. We hold the subject matter expertise for those national societies often. We come together and share ideas, cross-learning, as well as the coordination Marga just spoke of, so that we can share who's working in which countries, what's working the best, particularly in preparedness, response, and recovery. Our goal is to engage and define the advocacy for improving quality, as well as mainstreaming cash into the various parts of the movement. There's a core group of key Red Cross movement stakeholders. We meet regularly, approximately every 6 months at this time. The members from the organization, the national societies, the American Red Cross, the Austrian, Swiss, and German Alliance, so each of those 3 national societies have a representative. The British Red Cross, Canadian Red Cross, Danish Red Cross, the ICRC, of course, and the Federation, the Kenyan Red Cross, the Netherlands Red Cross, the Philippines Red Cross. That's our current membership. We have the ability to, of course, include and invite members as well. So just to give you a bit of an idea of the core members who are working to lead the strategy for the cash programming within the movement, as well as to provide tools or lessons learned. And then I wanted to go through a few of the key projects to give you a taste of what we've been doing over the last 2 to 3 years. One of the things that we started out with as we came together around, Jules mentioned that ICRC had very strong and robust SOPs. The Federation also had put out guidance early on. So what we did was we looked at mainstreaming or connecting those 2 different guidances for crossing and ensuring that we had similar standards for our SOPs. All of our guidance, as well as our cash and emergencies toolkit, our assessments, everything has been translated into the 4 key languages of English, French, Spanish, and Arabic. The cash and emergencies toolkit is the location where we keep all of our tools, as well as updates, resources, case studies, lessons learned. That is a public-facing page. It is also available on the Federation or the ICRC pages. But this is access to particularly the guidance, the actual field tools that we've tested. We've tried them out and we said, this works. The market assessment trainings are a new development. We've put them online 2015. I think we've put our first one online for the rapid assessment of markets. The market assessment guidance, the MAG, will be coming out in the coming year. It's something we're currently working on. There are online as well as in-person trainings of those. So we've been doing some piloting of that course to ensure that it's quality and that it's actually meeting the needs of our constituents. The cash training, the path, and the actual courses that we have. So one of the things linked with the cash personnel competency framework and job descriptions, one of the exercises that we've been going through is how do we have cash-ready people? How do we have volunteers, staff, delegates at each level, at all levels, ready to actually conduct cash transfer programming? So one of the things that we've been looking at is how do we prepare those people to do that program? So we've created Training Path, which is a series of trainings that can be taken for different levels. The Cash preparedness for national societies is an initiative that many of us as national societies have taken on. For those of us members in the Cash Peer Working Group, we've been looking at 10 national societies where we're actually providing technical advice as they work through how to create or integrate cash programming into their hazard planning or the contingency planning, as well as trainings for their staff so they can also implement or set up cash programming, particularly in relief and emergencies, to meet basic needs. The Cash Personnel Competency Framework and Job Description. This is looking at the key characteristics, personality traits, qualities, skill sets that it takes to actually run or participate in a cash transfer program. And we've come up with some key job descriptions for our particular system of surge within the movement. We have looked at some job descriptions of what that would entail. Finally, we have been doing quite a bit of research and investigation and trial and error or trial and pilot of various global payment systems or payment solutions, particularly in the private sector.
If every organization involved in the humanitarian sector is having a similar kind of reflection that you're having, what does that mean for the sector as a whole? And I think this raises some big questions, which the movement has some very unique opportunities to respond to. So let me try to just paint a very broad picture very quickly about some of those questions. So first of all, where are we at the moment on cash? So these are recent figures, 2 years ago, 2015, about 7% of international humanitarian assistance was spent in the form of cash. And as you can see, the vast majority of that was by UN agencies. Last year, as we all know, and as this event, I think, very strongly reflects, very substantial commitments were made to increase the use of cash. So it was great to hear Dominique saying the ICRC's goal to double the use of cash. The UNHCR has made a similar commitment by 2020. Some agencies have gone further. World Vision International has said they want 50% of their humanitarian work to be spent, to be delivered as cash by 2020. If all those commitments are followed through, then we should expect this pie to grow a lot. So this covers just less than $2 billion at the moment. But the commitments that have been made would suggest that that's really going to increase rapidly. And of course, those commitments have been crystallized into very substantial agreements like the Grand Bargain and a number of others. So it seems reasonable to conclude that cash is still coming. We're still in the early stages of getting to grips with cash. There's a lot more happening across the sector. We should expect a lot of growth here. Cash cuts across a whole lot of established ways of working. Within one organization, or perhaps even within the movement, this creates a certain set of challenges. Across the sector as a whole, it creates a new set of challenges. And we're already seeing this, I think, in a whole series of operational responses. So there was a fascinating study came out just recently about Ukraine, where some of these issues took a very concrete form in a heated debate about whether multipurpose cash should have its own line in the humanitarian response plan. And that's where things really get very concrete about funding and control and influence and how cash really operates at scale, at a big level, with some of the established dynamics around coordination system, around ways of working. Cash, it's not straightforward. And we've got beyond the idea that cash is a magic bullet. We know that it's not always appropriate, and the cash programs have to be carefully designed within each context and within each sector. We've heard eloquently about the need to develop new capacities and to invest in preparedness, and there are a few points there. And of course, there are new risks associated with cash, and those risks become more substantial as the scale of cash programs builds up. And we're certainly seeing that at the moment across the whole humanitarian sector, across responses. In general, the scale of cash programs is increasing, and certainly some actors have got a very strong ambition in this regard. And this, I think, also poses challenges for all of us in thinking through how we position ourselves in response to some of these dynamics. One of the things we've done at CALP is try to synthesize and aggregate all the major commitments that were made on cash last year and to some extent the year before. Now, none of this is new, but this sets out a very simple action-oriented framework for where do we go next? How do we radically increase the scale of cash and also increase the quality of cash programming? Everybody across the sector, more or less, is trying to do these 6 things. And this raises a big question about, so how do we do them better together? The first point speaks for itself. The second point is still a very substantial issue. I'm sure that's the case within the movement, within different societies. Certainly it's the case more broadly within, as it might be, one NGO or one UN agency. The extent to which cash is considered varies a great deal depending on some of the individuals involved. So we need to do more to build this into our standard procedures, our standards, and so on. Building capacity, of course, we've heard about, closely linked to preparedness. And I think it's widely recognized that worldwide we face a capacity gap for cash. That in some ways the political ambition for cash has outstripped the operational ability to deliver. And now we need to close that gap. Ensuring quality is always easier said than done, and of course this is part of a much broader debate about quality in humanitarian response. But there's certainly a great deal to do in developing shared standards that are based on the best evidence base from across the entire humanitarian sector, across all actors. How do we make existing knowledge available and useful and applied? Coordination, of course, is a hot topic at the moment, as I'm sure we're all very well aware, and refers back to some of those points I mentioned earlier about how cash cuts across mandates and the established humanitarian architecture. Now, we don't have a good answer at the moment to where does cash fit in the humanitarian architecture, and this is causing difficulties, real operational difficulties, because as we've seen in Ukraine, as I mentioned, and elsewhere, a vast amount of time gets caught up in interagency discussion, which could perhaps be used for running the response. Building evidence and innovation, some of the most exciting aspects of cash, I think, hinge around the scope for cash to enable new methods of delivery at scale. And when that's put together with scale, again, it raises the questions of, well, what does that mean for the role of different actors? Are we looking at greater specialism for some of the established humanitarian actors, less duplication of delivery mechanisms? So there are different visions about how this all plays out for humanitarian action as a whole. And this is thinking beyond now what cash means for one specific actor, but thinking for the sector as a whole. Well, what are the opportunities and the challenges created by cash? Here are a handful. This is by no means comprehensive. Some actors are embracing cash and seeing it as a way of improving current delivery mechanisms, which are carried out on quite an independent basis, but with better coordination. Cash drives coordination because, as we've heard, cash can be used across so many different sectors and for so many different objectives. There's another vision around having shared platforms for delivery that multiple different programs or funding routes can use. So, for instance, one common card that a number of different agencies could use, and we're seeing some innovations around that. There's another vision around, well, if cash is really going to be delivered at scale, at a national scale, maybe just one agency could do that. Would that drive a lot of efficiency and reduce duplication? What does that mean for other actors and for diversity? These are still open questions. Associated with that, there's a sense that cash could help drive more specialization within actors. Would this mean, for instance, for some of our NGOs, that they might get more involved in working on targeting or on referrals or on monitoring, rather than duplicating delivery capacity? And across all of these, there's a question, of course, of, well, how would this apply in different contexts? And I think that's also one of the strong lessons coming through at the moment is we need to strengthen the evidence base across contexts. Of course, there's no single blueprint that will work in Lebanon and also in North Nigeria. There's a vision, as was already mentioned, about expanding social protection systems, which, of course, has some very appealing aspects in terms of the localization agenda, in terms of coverage and reach. But then there are questions also about when that can be appropriate and when not, and certainly in some conflict situations, in places where social protection systems are still being built up, or where beneficiary lists may be partial, then there are substantial questions to be asked. And then there are ideas about new alternatives and broader thinking about, well, what's really the disruptive potential for cash to disintermediate the long chain between donors and recipients, along the same lines as disintermediation has happened in other sectors using technology, whether that's eBay or whether it's financial services. So across all these visions, we're still trying to understand how to balance some of the points I've put in that blue box. How do we make decisions about what's the right balance between efficiency and quality, coverage and speed, inclusion, accountability? How do we build on the strengths of different actors, but recognizing that cash, if it's really scaling up, as I mentioned in that first slide, is likely to drive substantial changes for how we relate to each other as a sector. So one of the things about cash that we're all finding is cash requires collaboration. At an operational level or a local level, there's clearly an added push from cash to coordinate around transfer sizes, around targeting, around coverage, also around relationships with government and financial service providers. And these can bring very real benefits, and I think we're seeing those coordination mechanisms work to a greater or lesser extent across current operations. So this has to happen, and we'll see more of this, and what we hope is that it can happen in a more predictable and smooth-running way. There's also a significant requirement for collaboration at a global level. So reflecting, I think, many of the points that we've already been discussing this morning, and considering, well, how do these conversations happen across the sector as a whole? How do they include the range of actors involved so that we're making significant decisions now about the future of cash in dialogue with a range of different actors, with southern organizations, with your national societies, with governments, a range of governments, with the private sector. And so we're not perhaps operating just within our more traditional comfort zone here in Geneva, for instance. All these things we need to do. We need to continue to maintain momentum for cash, recognizing that now cash is being mainstreamed. We've reached the stage of attracting some real opposition. Now, this is a good thing because it shows that cash is starting to matter. But we need to engage with some of the lobbies working very actively against cash, like the agricultural lobby in the States, or like some of the right-wing press in the UK. We need to support policymakers to keep moving cash on. We need to develop standards and guidelines, and the more we can do this collectively, the greater hope we have of making that operational collaboration work smoothly. Everyone agrees around building the evidence base. We are still at the beginning of this in some sectors. There's a long way to go. We all need to be sharing our knowledge and lessons, I think it goes without saying. But we need the infrastructure to be able to do that consistently and to make existing knowledge useful. The more we can build on the synergies and move on from some of the tensions that cash has created across the sector, clearly the better that will be for fulfilling the potential of cash for the people we're here to serve. And so let me conclude with, this is to a great extent why CALP exists. So CALP is the global platform for organizations working on cash and humanitarian action. We help manage the processes. We create the collective space to progress some of these critical areas, again, with the hope of bringing conversations like of strengthening conversations like the one you're having today and linking them to the similar conversations happening elsewhere across the sector.
I'm wondering if you could share a bit more about how you're thinking about investing in the preparedness there, and for example, pre-positioning integration with payment providers, pre-positioning the right not just the practices, but the right tools, the right data collection instruments and so forth to be able to respond quickly and also avoid some of the kind of repeated activities around identifying and contracting with payment providers and so forth.
So what we've been looking at, particularly in the preparedness phase, is we do have an approach that we use for building the national society capacities. Generally looking at the volunteer training, looking at the SOPs, the processes, etc. What we do recognize is that there are the need for that national society, particularly to be able to provide cash. It will depend on the systems that are available in that country. So one of the parts of the process is to do an evaluation of each country and look at each national society's, what is their current technology state? We have everything from great emergency operations centers with great screens on the walls to I don't have a laptop in my local branch. So we have to gauge what each national society's branches or capacity is to have that technology, and then figure out how that technology would actually be either purchased or beefed up or enhanced. The second part is looking at that national society as part of our initial assessment, and looking at what does that national society have in country for what are the electronic mechanisms in that country. So mobile is very common in Asia, but as you dig into it, it's actually not as common in Asia when you're looking at far regions out in the north of Bangladesh or the north of Myanmar. So really grounding what is the actual technology that is in each country, and then connecting with the providers in those countries. We've been looking at country contracts. Where possible, we would encourage the National Society to engage with a country contract with a financial service provider or a technology that's available. We've also looked at regional solutions, which we currently have in the Americas region, a larger ability to give cash through a card system. We are looking at those regional solutions. We're also looking at the global solution, a potential global contract or potential global technology that would cover multiple countries, not just 2 or 3 at a time.
What is the problem or the issues or your difficulties relating the cash transfer at this moment, and how do you deal with that?
One of the main challenges is how to bring cash in some rural areas where you don't have really transfer mechanism existing, one that can help you to advance with the program. There are some concerns that we have, and then before we decide on the use of not of cash or the type of mechanism that we are going to use, we try to understand all these challenges and then to adapt to the local solution. That's why in the transfer we do, sometimes we are obliged to go directly with local traders who have capacity to distribute cash to our beneficiaries, and then we organize how we pay them back, and this is one. And we have varieties of local adapted transfer mechanisms just to make sure that where we have this kind of risk or difficulties, we adjust by adapting to the local solutions, or we go directly for vouchers if we know that local traders can also supply good directly the required commodities to our beneficiaries. It's really one big challenge. And now, in terms of security, when we feel that cash is not really a tool that we can use because of risk that we cannot mitigate, and then we discuss with the communities how we adjust the response, or we bring in kind directly to beneficiaries to mitigate this risk.
I will add to that also that the lack of capacity, the demand is increasing, and we are building our capacities, our network, our volunteer capacity, but still there is a gap there. We, as part of the preparedness, we look at preparing not only our global search teams and our colleagues in different departments to integrate cash into their existing roles and responsibilities, but also to work with our national societies that are more cash-friendly. On that sense, also the politics play an important role. In some countries, the governments may not feel so comfortable with this issue of the Red Cross or any humanitarian organization giving cash. So within our auxiliary role, our national society's auxiliary role in the preparedness phase, we also work with the existing national response and at the political level with our national societies and with the country to open the space for cash responses. It has changed quite dramatically in many countries, but still a lot of work to be done on that front.
Is this global future of cash the private sector? If you look at, say, cash in the UK, insurance payouts to the recent floods, it's money going from the private sector to the people who have been affected. How do you see, in 10 years' time, the private sector's role within the cash sector?
Well, obviously we don't know at the moment. There are such range of visions. On the one hand, some people argue that the potential is immense around the role of the private sector, and that we could be seeing large-scale delivery carried out by private sector finance service providers, by whether those are banks or mobile phone operators or money transfer companies, in ways that really remove a great deal of delivery from traditional humanitarian actors. And clearly that's a possibility, and certainly in some contexts. On the other side, people argue, well, in some of the places where humanitarian action is most needed, that infrastructure is least available. And so we're going to continue to need additional capacity, perhaps through humanitarian actors, that can respond quickly to the local context. Certainly we know that the private sector is working closely with many other major actors on the development side on financial inclusion, and there are substantial incentives for them to get involved in expanding their markets. The growth in their engagement with the kinds of, with people in crisis and people living in poverty has been massive over recent years, and of course that's not about to go away. So what a fascinating question. I think we all need to stay closely involved with that and understand what are the opportunities as well as the threats to our existing ways of working.
And then I'll try to share with you where the ICRC wants to go with cash. We mainly focus our cash approach in economic and security programs. Roughly, we did also a bit on a more ad hoc basis in our health program, trying to, pay the bill for patients in some area. We did also provide money to former detainees, but again, it is more done on an ad hoc basis. The number of beneficiaries so far, roughly 1 million, and in terms of direct cost, the money that goes directly to beneficiary, roughly 60 million Swiss francs. I don't know how other organizations are counting their cash programs. We just put the amount of money that is received by beneficiary, and we do not add any other human resources, transaction cost, and all the other indirect costs. That's why maybe the amount looks a bit small, but with respect to the overall ICRC operation, it's quite significant. So last year, end of the year, the direction of the ICRC decided to gear up and to bring cash to the next level, and we have the ambition to double the amount within or by 2021, and the number of beneficiaries as well. So it means that we will try to implement cash program across disciplines. So moving from using cash to improve access to goods, and I know that we're not only doing that, to improving access to services. What does it mean for our WATAB or WATSAN programs when it comes to improving access to water, to energy, to electricity? We know that some of victims in armed conflict do pay quite a lot of money just for having electricity in their homes. What does it mean for improving access to health services? How can we better include cash in our protection approach? These are the type of questions that will need to be answered. But this is definitely the area where we want to dig in. And of course, to continue our reflection and collaboration within the movement, participating to the implementation of the framework, maybe bringing our approach to national society to the next level. We are doing a lot of programs together with national societies in the field. Now we believe it is time to bring in to the next and to really build the capacity of those national society so they can also implement those programs in an independent manner. But we won't be able to do that alone, and we'll have to expand the scope and work differently. It sounds bizarre for the ICRC, but to open up a bit, to continue working with others, not only with the group there, but also with UN agencies. We are already in contact with either UNHCR or WHO, because the beauty of cash is that we're all learning together from our own experience. And frankly speaking, most of the time we have many more questions than answers. And the whole question of technology will need to be factored in as well. There are specificities that we have to take into account when it comes to conflict. And finally, we hope that by putting all together this experience, we'll be able also very soon to align our new strategy. In terms of challenges, maybe just a few things on when it comes to conflict. In many areas, we wish to do more cash, and we have to realize that sometimes it is not that easy to do that. We have a recent experience in Nigeria, northern Nigeria, where we had quite great ambitions in terms of cash, and finally we had to change at the last minute our strategy because at a given time this was not anymore the appropriate approach. So the notion of volatility, insecurity, access, if you want to do program, be it in cash or in kind, you need to have access to the place in a repeated manner. You have to make your assessment, you have to discuss with people, then you have to monitor the impact of your response. So you really need to have access. We often confronted with weak infrastructures, absence of financial services, weak governance mechanism, the politicization of aid, and I think cash is not an exception there as well. So we just have to see how we can deal at best with that. Maybe a pinch of salt on the overall optimism on cash as well. I know it is trendy, and it's a good approach, but there are risks. We just don't have to forget this is a mean and not an end in itself. So sometimes it is not appropriate to do cash in a given context, and we just have to admit that. There are risks for beneficiaries, for ICRC staff. It was mentioned this morning the opposition from certain actors on either humanitarian assistance in general or on cash in particular. In some contexts, we have local actors, local government telling us, don't even dare to start cash because we don't want that. We don't want you to empower our population, for example. So this is something that we'll have to factor in. Another risk related to conflict is the whole notion of data protection. How do we deal with the data of people in countries affected by war? I mean, this has vast protection implications. And as any other organization, the ICRC has many other conflicting priorities. So we'll have just, at the same time to be present, to have access, to confront extremely difficult security environment, to negotiate on a daily basis our license to operate, I would say, in many contexts, and at the same time developing the most meaningful presence, having in mind always, and not only with the cash program, but in particular, the do no harm approach. How can we ensure that what we do in cash programming will not harm either the beneficiary, the ICRC, the national society, or other actors? So to sum it up, we really have the commitment to increase our cash program. We also have the commitment to increase our cooperation with the other actors. I hope that one day we will all have the same understanding on how we count beneficiaries and money we give to them, because I think there's not really an alignment on that for the time being. But I'm convinced, and we are convinced, that by working together with NGOs, with local actors, involving local authorities, that we will make the step forward all together.
I'd like to share with you the current discussion that's happening within the Federation and with movement partners. We are now being challenged in terms of expectations around scaling up that came from the WHS, initiatives such as the recent ECHO guidelines that came out 2-3 weeks ago. So it's prompting an awful lot of internal reflection in terms of where we go, what are our levels of expectations and how we're going to meet them. So towards the end of last year, it was decided that we needed, rather than just a series of ad hoc conversations, to initiate a fairly quick but reflective process internally to take stock of where we are and give some thought as to where we want to go, which of course is obviously the title of the whole session today, the future of cash. So to cut to the chase, the aspiration was to commission a roadmap Rather than this just being entirely an internal conversation, we looked at both conversations internally and externally. The process was led by Paul Harvey. I think many of you in the room know Paul, a long history in working within cash, but also complemented by Tracy Rains, formerly with the American Red Cross, and again has been part of the cash conversations within the movement operationally, again, field experience for some time. So the two of them both spoke internally and externally. In fact, they may have well have spoken to some people in the room. And in some ways, they're very much an open process to try and understand how are the other agencies, such as UNHCR, such as WFP, such as World Vision. I mean, what are the processes they're going through? How are they? What are their aspirations? What does that mean internally? And then, of course, talking to movement partners. And the Cash Peer Working Group has been a great forum for that. Again, to understand, what might that mean for this challenging institution we know as the Federation. Awful lot of strengths, but also it has some constraints in and around that. So what I'm going to share with you very briefly are just, I suppose, a sort of synthesis of the outputs from that roadmap. Now this hasn't actually even had a conversation at senior management level yet. We're still very much in process, and I'm not sure even the extent to which it was discussed with the Cash Peer Working Group this last 2 days. So this is a work in process. So it's not going to give you the answers, but here are some of kind of the questions and the challenges prompted by the external team. The team came up with was looking at the actual cash programming doubling to 4 billion over the next 3 to 5 years. I mean, it's a guesstimate, and everyone probably has their own idea, but certainly it's increasing, exponentially. Again, we know from ECHO, but it's the same with other donors, that they're looking for, efficiency gains from larger scale programs. The challenge for the Federation is how do we position ourselves within this landscape, given the fact we are one of the leading actors as a collective, but given the fact that everything's moving around us, where is our position? Where should we be going? And if we are, depending on that aspiration, what does that mean in terms of some of our internal changes, our systems, our processes, our modalities for doing business, both internally and as a movement? So in terms of, again, the vision, recognizing that if we are to continue to deliver on cash, it means scaling up the capacity and the number of national societies who do cash. It means actually looking at this not just being a bit of a bolt-on, but being part of core business for national societies. Our national societies are always there. We're working before, during, and after disaster. Although a lot of the cash program, it's sort of profiled around response. Obviously, for us, it's how do we embed it in the preparedness work and the longer-term recovery. And of course, again, mentioned already, but how do we capitalise on the unique nature of Red Cross, Red Crescent, the auxiliary role of national societies, both being present in country, auxiliary to their government, and that increasing connection with the social protection and social safety nets. So in terms of what that may mean, in some ways these are some of the kind of the challenges, the questions in terms of what that may mean for IFRC. And something that we're aware of is that although a lot of the conversation, again I go back to the ECHO guidelines, is about in some ways a tussle between who wants to be the primary recipient, and clearly there's some aspirations around again being the receiver of the funding and what that means. There's also obviously the practical reality of actually the operational end, and in some ways, again, I go back to the ECHO guidelines and the fact that it's an A and a B, and you can't have both. But of course, for Red Cross, Red Crescent, again, we're not just present in the big emergencies. We're there in small and medium-scale disasters. We're there throughout. So, in some ways, it's not so much a choice of which model works for us. It's actually, we actually, in some ways, need to be active in all those models, whether it is potentially the large-scale emergencies, potentially being the primary recipient, and either in working with national societies or external agencies. It's actually enabling our national societies to be the partner of choice for other primary recipients, such as UN agencies or others. And then, of course, quite uniquely, as IFRC, certainly through our DREF mechanism, we're a donor. So we actually need to provide that throughout when maybe no one else is present. So it's not a question of just selecting which model works for us. The reality is we need to be geared to be present and active and supporting our national societies across any of those models. In some ways, that's the kind of lens to look at some of these issues and challenges around what our support role could be. So firstly,
looking at how we optimize our DREF mechanism around being that donor for cash program. We're doing it already. We just need to finesse this and potentially do this at a larger scale. What does that mean in terms of our guidance and technical support? Again, you heard from my colleagues in terms of, there's a great suite of tools and training that's already there. But clearly, is that sufficient? Do we need to change that? Do we need to scale that up? How do we get that out there? Practically, we have some national societies very strong operationally, some are not so. If we are to scale up, that has huge impact on our surge capacity and where that's coming from and who those people are. Again, a challenge from the review team in terms of how can we be that advocate. I suppose this event today, obviously with ICRC and others, is an example of how can we give better voice around cash programming. A key role is highlighted there around the issue of partnerships. Yes, in some cases we're being challenged, obviously with UN agencies, others approaching national societies. It's not new. Obviously many national societies already are implementing partners around other in-kind distributions. So what does that mean for us? How can we assist those national societies in brokering the appropriate partnership arrangements? Is that a whole new area of work? We kind of do it in an ad hoc way. Is that something we need to invest more time in? And of course, looking at how do we deliver on that as a federation. And on that last bullet point, it talks about both agile models for partnership, but also this issue around shared leadership. If I can perhaps unpack that a bit by perhaps sharing with you a comment that came up from one of our workshops around the development of the roadmap, where I think it was recognized that individual national societies as a secretariat, we each have a small number of kind of cash people, cash experts. On their own, that's quite small. The British Red Cross have got 5, 6, I'm plucking some numbers out, but the Secretariat, we've got kind of 3 core positions. But across the Federation, we have 45, 50 people. So actually, and again, I'm sure colleagues can challenge me on that, but in terms of what that means, as one entity, puts us in a much stronger position. How do we make that work? So the notion around the shared leadership is looking at, rather than it being a function that just reports into Geneva, how can we have this as a modality that actually gives the participating national societies ownership of both thought leadership and the policy direction, as well as operational, with a reporting line higher up. So the challenges for the Federation are, where does the conversation around cash sit within our leadership and our governance? Yes, there's commitment individually from our leadership, but it's not actually on the leadership agenda, it's not on our governance agenda. And should it be? That's the challenge. In terms of how we're organised and where cash sits within the structure, again, some challenges there. Some of the other leading actors have put cash quite high in the structure. What does that mean for us? Is it the symbolism of putting it high in the structure? Is it about ensuring that the whole institution is, to quote my cash colleagues, cash ready? What does that mean in terms of our other support systems? What does that mean for our finance systems, our risk management and audit? We're not there yet. Our IT teams, we're not there yet. Perfectly transparent, because I think many in the room know this. If we are to be big in cash, those pieces have to align. There's not a common conversation yet. That's a big step to make. And if we are to be a bigger actor, we have to have those conversations. The same goes around the program management in a coherent and consistent way, again, across the Federation. And last but not least, it comes around to this notion of who are we partnering with? And in some ways, this goes back to, again, looking at these range of models and recognizing that, potentially there is a place for us to be the primary recipient. And what does that mean in terms of who we then partner with at an operational end? If it means looking at how do we better enable some of our national societies to take on a significant role, like the Turkish Red Crescent. 350 million euros. That's a huge program for obviously a very strong national society. Are there aspirations from other national societies to similarly step up and play that role? And how can we help them both through providing that capacity and establishing, those partnership arrangements? And because crucially, it also means how do we partner with IFSC or national societies, again, being part of an alliance, as per the conversation that's happening right now in Greece. How do we finesse that? Again, we're having those conversations, but it's in dare I say it, very much a reactive way. We need to be far more systematic if we're going to do that at scale.
So I'm here representing the Cash Clear Working Group. We have been working very diligently, as you heard this morning, but one of our latest sort of pieces of work is trying to understand, based on the wealth of operational experience we have, collectively and individually, what are some of those main blockages to larger scaled cash, and then how do they, of course, become our priorities looking forward. In the spirit of the movement, we have been working collectively as a movement on the cash portfolio for many years now, and that's a very important component of this strategic framework, that it is inclusive, it is a framework that each movement component can find their contribution within to the scale up of cash. It will also provide a sort of frame from which independent organisation-specific strategies can be developed. So first of all, we have the goal. We're basically saying by 2020, the movement will scale up the use of cash transfer programming when and where appropriate by developing a or multiple cash models that can guarantee global, regional and national capacity to deliver quality response to vulnerable and crisis-affected populations. We do want to scale up cash, as has already been mentioned this morning, where it's appropriate. We're not saying we're going to do cash everywhere. There are many potentially sectoral programs where, public health outcomes may not be reached with cash. There are other solutions, and we need to appreciate that. We do, recognising our local proximity, need to have global, regional and national capacity, and we want a predictability around that capacity. We have done some large operations. There's been quite a few pain points in delivering to that scale quickly. So we want that to become much more predictable and to have that guaranteed capability. Vulnerable and crisis-affected populations represents our mandate that we are working in the longer term on resilience and recovery programs as well as those emergencies. We will be developing indicators for the framework. We're in the process of doing that at the moment. For us as a movement, we want to have collective indicators around the sort of volume and quality of the cash scale-up that we're hoping to do, the number of people we reach, the volume that we budget and expend on cash, as well as, crucially for us, the number of national societies who are operationally ready to do large-scale cash in their domestic environments through the plethora of models that Graham mentioned. So we have 4 strategic objectives. The first one is policy and advocacy. We know that we have a lot of work to do here. As a movement, as we've said, we have that operational base, but we now need to create key common messaging and positioning across the movement and with our key stakeholders at a national level, at a global level, and everything in between. We know that we need to work on policies, procedures, and systems. Our experience is that we originally, many years ago, thought that cash is a commodity, we can sort of deliver it the same as we can in kind, while experience is clear that that's not possible. We need to have refined systems in logistics, in finance, in audit, monitoring and evaluation to be adapted and enhanced to facilitate scaled up cash. On the policies and procedures side, that's something at the global level with the movement institutions, but key within those national societies operating with scaled up cash, that those SOPs, those ways of working, who's involved at what decision at what point need to be developed during preparedness ahead of time if we're to do large, rapid quality programs. We want to recognise that the Cash Peer Working Group is an effective coordination internally to guide the quality of the overall cash agenda, but particularly around the key messaging, so that we are speaking with one voice, we are speaking on the same issues in the same way across the movement. Is an extremely important one for us, and where we really have a niche, I think, in the humanitarian sector around the preparedness and capacity building. So, as I've said, making sure we have that capability tested, refined, invested in ahead of time. Our priorities within that strategic objective are that movement leadership, resource and demonstrate commitment to the cash scale-up. We recognise we've done a lot of operational work, but we really need leadership to champion this, to drive through the changes needed in systems, etc., and to support the advocacy work at all levels. This is movement leadership both within ICRC and Federation, but crucially also within our national society. Cash strategy development, we know it's a priority to be clear what and how in terms of the strategy, we're going to build that capability for scaled up cash. We need that to be implemented throughout the various components of the movement. And as I've said, the important thing for us is that that's done through preparedness investments. We have a priority around cash coordination, both internally within the movement. We have our various coordination bodies, but crucially with other stakeholders. And that again ranges from country cash working groups that the national societies and movement components collaborate with, as well as at regional and global level. We need to both contribute our learning to the ongoing endeavour, as well as learn from others where that can help us refine our approaches. And the last one, just to always remind ourselves that as we develop movement-wide global tools, training, systems, procedures, actually, yes, we need a standardised approach, but everything we do has to be contextualised with our national societies in their national environment. For example, one of our big learnings has been when we develop tools and trainings, we need to allocate sufficient resources for local translation so that those tools can be internalised or mainstreamed into a national society's normal way of working and tools if we're to build that capability. Strategic Objective 3, design and implementation. This is about having the quality, remaining current, relevant, and improving the accountability of what we do throughout the disaster cycle. Our end point is, of course, to serve populations with quality assistance that's efficient, that's effective and accountable, and also to look at different operational models that we need to have in place, both for multi-purpose or unconditional cash for basic needs, but also increasingly looking at how cash can be integrated and embedded into different sectoral programs, where that's appropriate and what that means in terms of the capability and tools we need to develop. The last one, which is no surprise, is our cash-ready human resources. We do have a pool of experts, but we need a bigger pool, as every agency, and we need to grow that pool and then enable it to be mainstreamed and integrated into everybody's job. You know, cash is now sort of seen slightly separately, but of course our objective is that over the life of this strategy it will be mainstreamed into what everybody does. The last strategic objective is around partnership and innovation. We know that if we're to do this scale up, we need to look at new models of partnership. We need to take in innovation and technology. Otherwise, that scale is just not reachable. So our priorities within that, strategic partnerships with the private sector, with other humanitarian organisations, coalitions, consortiums, new models and ways of working, where we need to be much more agile and be able to react to the external trends and our needs on the ground. We need to embrace innovations, particularly around data management, payment mechanisms, technology, and ways of working, actually. And so there's a whole body around that we then need to internalise and operationalise with our national society members. That's our strategic framework. There's a little bit of a rush through, but yes, questions will come, I'm sure.
Hello, I'm Joelle from the UK Mission. We believe that cash is an increasingly important part of humanitarian action, but we as donors also need support from our Parliament and our public. And so we were wondering, how will the Red Cross movement convince the Daily Mail and US Congress of the value of cash?
Maybe two thoughts on that. The first one, and this is one of the responsibility, I think, of an aid organization, to ensure the traceability of aid being provided from every penny, from the donor down to the beneficiary. I hope, by demonstrating that indeed money is reaching beneficiary, this I think is the first step. And the second is what I would call, in the broader sense, of accountability to beneficiary. The best evidence would come from the people themselves. If you can collect testimonies of people who did receive cash in Somalia, in northern Nigeria, and they can clearly express, without us making their script, but saying that indeed this has changed their life, this has restored their dignity and alleviated their suffering, this may be also a convincing argument, but I would say the two elements.
building that evidence base around how people spend and what they can spend cash on compared to our traditional assistance is the key, absolutely. We also in British Red Cross have a sort of communication strategy that we've developed, identifying different audience groups, and the public in the UK, some of which are Daily Mail readers, are a target group within that. And that's about that key messaging being clear and consistent, backed by evidence around some of the rationales of why programming decisions were made, in particular contexts, but also overall.
UNHCR, I think, is very convincing, the cash, and I've been dealing with it for now almost 10 years. But at the same time, I go back to why we started doing cash in the first place. It was to create in the mix, because we were in-kind only organizations. And irrespective of all which came out in the media, of resources being diverted, being lost, we never got moved at all. We kept on taking in-kind out and distributing it, irrespective of what came out in the media. All of a sudden, we have become very media shy. And it is because of cash, that's one thing. At the same time, I think we are moving away from the conversation, which is actually at the heart of the whole thing. Why we are isolating cash? What we do is not cash only. We do in-kind, we do services, access to the services, and that mix is what makes us good humanitarian organizations. Now, if we start isolating cash, I think we'll miss the point completely. And I think the discipline, we have worked 10 years to bring cash from being ignored, being resisted, to the point where it actually is accelerating. I think the next challenge is to create discipline around it, so we don't lose the point, that is to have a bit better impact on the people that we so much want to assist. And if we don't have an impact, and it only becomes efficiency and speed game, then I think we need to rethink why we are in this business in the first place.
Discipline comes in the quality and focus on program design, which is at that assessment and response options analysis. Actually, the point of cash and the way we should position it in our key messaging and advocacy is that there's a process of assessing need, how people are coping with how they were before. As part of that, the final stage is a response options analysis. So you look at all the potential responses that could be appropriate for those populations, and you go through a process of exploring the feasibility of each of those. Cash is one of those, as is in-kind provision, as is service provision, as is any combination of those. And that importantly brings in some of the critical elements for conditional cash of technical support, quality assurance, safety assurance, etc. So from a technical side, that's what we've really got to focus on in the key messaging. The other part is cash has come from a programming area, but more and more as we institutionalize it, it needs to be driven by different sectors, functions within each organization, and no longer that the programs are the sort of bottleneck. So for things, as we were talking on the UK side, having communications driving those key messages and agendas, policy experts driving it from their perspective, supported by the technical people, is a key shift for how we integrate this rather than it being a standalone concept.
Put my sort of hat on as a technical sector professional with background in shelter. I think for me one of the slight concerns all the time has been, I see the conversation as being slightly more sophisticated. Conditional cash has been used certainly in the shelter and housing sector for many, many years. It was called housing. It wasn't called cash and housing or cash and shelter. It was housing. And because housing is an expensive asset and the ingredients are expensive, often cash is a convenient way of doing that. Obviously, it's a normative way. People have mortgages or loans or whatever to buy property or to extend property. So there's nothing unusual in the humanitarian context. One of my concerns as the cash conversation has gone ahead is the fact that it's just been one conversation. I actually think it needs to be a little bit more nuanced nuance. Conditional cash, I think, is far lower risk. It's been there for much, much longer. There are a lot of systems and processes. I'm not saying they couldn't be better. Back to Aid's point, that is clearly a core part. I think where we've seen perhaps the biggest escalation and perhaps where we are most challenged is around the multi-purpose grants. And the messaging, which is all very good, which is fantastic, you have all this choice, yeah, you're liberated. Obviously that causes some of the reactions we heard around the Daily Mail and others, and I think that also presents some challenges. So my sense is a lot of the conversation around cash actually is around multi-purpose cash. Reporting. Actually, the conditional cash, well, that's covered by the normal sector reporting mechanisms. It's the multi-purpose cash or unconditional cash. That's where I think we need to kind of think through. So I'm not necessarily giving you a simple answer to the question, but I think if we disaggregate the conversation, I think we will be far closer to be able to have a more coherent answer to some of these challenges, but also to informing the steps we need to take. Break these things apart.
How do you see the future progressing about getting sort of leaning in a bit more into the rest of the coordination structures that may be operating? Would there be a possibility for participation in sort of local cash working groups and things like that? Is that already happening?
Now, yes, indeed, it is happening in the field in various contexts, and I think this is the beauty of cash. First, from the internal ICRC side, we don't have any choice. This will break our internal silo. And I think just for that, it is a good opportunity because it is forcing people from different discipline and sector to think differently on how best they can provide assistance and protection in the field. So I think this is good, and we are working on those internal mechanisms. I think the same would happen outside the ICRC. So I do not advocate for a cash cluster, but if cash would provide an opportunity to enhance the discussion and coordination amongst clusters, I think this would be wonderful. But the conversation at the field level or at the HQ level, this is already taking place.
And I also have a question for Emma, if I may. How have you had a positive experience in working in the preparedness around cash on the local level with UN partners?
Where we've supported key national societies through the preparedness for cash, there are one or two cases where certainly those national societies are also implementing partners for WFP to deliver cash within their national context. I think that the experience of those was that those programs can be somewhat separate from the normal everyday business of the national society. And I think more recently, WFP with ourselves, the movement and the federation are looking at ways to bring those two approaches closer together so that, we all have the common interest of having one stronger national society who can deliver cash and has the capability and the resources to be able to build that capability to do that. And then they, of course, are an implementing partner either of movement, of UN, and directly with donor funds in the localization of aid agenda.
I want to invite our Philippine Red Cross member, who on cash, to say that they are chairing the cash coordination at the national level in the Philippines and many of the sub-levels also.
Yeah, it's true that we actually now is the chair of the HCT Cash Working Group in the Philippines. So we have several members, World Vision, WFP, of course UN OCHA is actually the secretariat to actually look into how we coordinate to other, other organizations.
For the Philippine Red Cross, we have an enabling environment in terms of cash programming because it's accepted by our leadership. We have, a focal person who's leading cash. We have a cash team in the National Society. So we're actually the ones who's holding the file of cash transfer programming in our department as disaster management to ensure that we will be the reference center of cash programs across all sectors that we implement.
For a very long time, we have used cash transfer since 2009 up to date. And we have used it in different contexts, actually. Drought, floods, fire, and we've done it in small scale. Now, in this year, for example, we are using it in drought, and we are using it in a very big way. thanks to our movement partners, the ICRC, the ICRC, and the PNSS, partner national societies, who have given us a chance to use cash in large scale. Good thing is that we have done cash preparedness before. We have had our staff trained on cash transfer in emergencies, and we have had them, staff and volunteers, working in the various cash transfer programming, both pilot and small to medium scale. So that preparedness has already taken place in terms of training, which is institutionalization in that matter. And another aspect that we have in cash preparedness is that we've had us attending meetings, several coordination forums, that is the CALP, Cash Learning Partnership, and in that case we've been able to learn and share in those forums. Another aspect of cash preparedness is we've had pre-existing agreements with the financial service providers, and in our case in Kenya we have a pre-existing agreement with the largest mobile operator, that is Safaricom, and actually 60% of Kenyans have their subscribers, their mobile subscribers, meaning that they are able to access cash through their mobile phones. So we take advantage of that and actually that platform to distribute more cash, because it's already existing. The infrastructure is good, the markets are functioning, and we have the platform, we have the agreement with the service provider.
We are having a cash component in several projects in the Ukraine that we are active and engaged with already for the last couple of years. That can be mainly there in the form of vouchers, be it for construction material or pharmacy vouchers for chronically ill vulnerable population. Or we had a cash component, we had a cash response project after the big Balkan floods in 2014, mainly with bank transfers to flood damaged and vulnerable population. We have an increasing interest in implementing and supplementing our ongoing projects with a cash component that can be in addition to in-kind or just a pure cash grant. That can take place in the relief file or as well in the early recovery file, and now we're in the process also to trying to integrate it into the long-term program planning and implementation. The Austrian Red Cross is in an alliance with the Swiss and German Red Cross to move the cash file together jointly forward, joint projects, joint plannings or trainings, and a further integration between the three national societies.
Him getting the SIM and activating it, that he had already got the money.
Actually, I was thinking how long it took you to actually, so from the moment that you decided, okay, we will...
It's loading.
So that happened without paying any fees?
It's remote. Then what happens, Jude will put the card on the machine, so will put his PIN number to register people with their fingerprints, preferably all our beneficiaries, if we get the green light.
Cash transfer programs are a strategic priority for growth, consolidation, professionalization in all parts of the movement. We're not newbies in this business. We've been doing it for some time. We know how to do it. It's about getting scale and quality and appropriateness.
So thank you all very much for letting me be here.